all our attendees and panelists. I'm Sarah Mavrakis, Head of Commercial here at Welo Data. Thank you for joining us today. A quick intro for myself. I am a functional leader in the AI data industry with an educational background in biology and business, working in global operations, enterprise technology, focused on NLP and the benefits that businesses can derive from ML models for the past 10 years. To give you a quick overview of today's exciting session, we'll be exploring the crucial aspects of data integrity and trust in AI training, which are vital, as many of you know, for producing the highest quality models. This is a Welo Data webinar, and Welo Data is the world's AI training data company, from hyperscalers to startups building data pipelines for AI models and LLMs. Ensuring that the individuals who are training our AI models are properly vetted is the first step to preventing fraud and ensuring quality in all AI models and all the outputs that you use on a daily basis. We recently launched NEMO, our Network Identity Management and Operations platform. This is the first of its kind in the industry, and it is designed to tackle the growing challenges that we're all seeing on a daily basis in data quality, trust, and origin of data pipelines. So we know NEMO will lead the way in setting new high standards in the AI training data industry, and we are so excited to lead this way for everyone. I think we'd all agree that data integrity is the backbone of any successful AI model. In today's webinar, our experts will give us insights into measures that can verify, vet identities of AI experts, the qualifications of anybody participating in AI training, and share strategies for you to use for preventing fraud so that you can build models in a robust manner with thorough training data pipelines for all of your needs. Please submit any questions that you have throughout, and we'll spend some time at the end of the discussion to address those questions. Today, I'm joined by our expert guests, Knut Haraldson and Carrie Campbell, who bring a wealth of experience in responsible AI and data integrity. Knut and Carrie, welcome. And if I could ask you each to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your work in this field.
Hi, I'm Carrie Campbell, and I am the head of data quality here at Welo Data. I have been in the machine learning and AI annotation industry for about 10 years now, and I've managed projects in all kinds of use cases from large to small. And here at Welo Data, I have the extraordinary opportunity of focusing specifically on data quality, which has long been a passion of mine. And here my role really is to design and implement solutions that are going to result in high quality data and ensure that the data is reaching our customers as expected and resulting in successful outcomes. So thank you so much. Excited to discuss this all with you.
Thank you for joining us.
And hey, everybody, my name is Knut Haraldson. I'm a head of growth strategy here at Welo Data. I've been working in AI for about 3 years and then have a interesting operational background for 5 years before that. But in AI, I've had a particular focus on data labeling operations, equitable workforce management, and the automation of critical processes. So I'm going to try to bring those into the discussion today.
Awesome. Well, let's jump in. First, big swath or big view. We know data integrity is a huge problem for data science departments and the people that we all interact with on a daily basis, and they rely on quality and accuracy to enhance the performance of their models. So it's important for us to address the challenge of workforce trust, which we know we focused and we put a lot of content kind of out about this specific area in how it reduces the risk for AI data training. So maybe we start with talking about some of the key challenges in vetting at the very beginning of that process, vetting and verifying workforce identity and verifying those qualifications for people. So who they are, verifying who they are and what they have background in and where they are, those types of things. Maybe Knut, you can give us some background on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you're actually vetting candidates, you want to be able to categorize the workforce qualifications. You want to be able to do identity verification. And really importantly, you want to be able to do that in concert with your onboarding. You want to parallelize your processes if you can to actually accelerate what you're doing. If you just depend on one step before the other, you end up gating yourself, which can be a bit of a problem. But growing a team, you want to know how capable they are, if they're actually doing the work a lot of that can depend on that they are who they are and what they say they are. Sometimes that can be really simple and direct. There are known ways to do this of certifications, identity, government documentation, and combining these elements in concert, the more things that you end up having to provide, or if there's difficulty to provide those, if these are more available just through legal means, the more that's actually going to direct you to having good responses. Those are really clear items that can be accessed up front. If I require a university degree, it may sound simple, kind of table stakes, but it's important to also say, hey, does that university actually exist? Not just that you have the degree, but is it real? Is it a university that I can trust? This applies to other things as well. And so when you tie those systems together, that allows us to really identify violations early on in the process to then scrub out vetting qualifications later down the line and have a more robust thing that takes them early.
The example you gave about the university is actually, it sounds simple, but if you think about the global scale, right, there's thousands and thousands of universities that people could come from and tons of degrees that didn't exist or did exist, and all of these different types of qualifications. It's actually not a simple task at all when you operate at a global scale in hundreds of languages and dialects. So even something simple as that is quite complicated.
Yeah, simple in concept, not in process.
Yes, exactly. And Carrie, how in production, maybe you could talk a little bit about how this works in practice and in production and how that ties to quality.
So this absolutely continues to be a challenge. They pass through the rigor in the pre-production step, and then we continue this on in production because we have to continually verify that the person continues to be who they say they are, where they say they are. And so we uphold that rigor that starts at pre-production, and then we combine that with processes that are continually evaluating data quality. And there are a series of tactics that we can use in production to determine and to, it's kind of like, to me, I think of it like kind of like a sandwich. You need all the elements of a sandwich to make a really good sandwich, and we're trying to make a great sandwich. So some of this, of course, is confirming identity, and all others are determining quality and other signals from the data that that are going to support that we are verifying who they say they are, where they are, plus all of the data quality requirements that we have. And the challenge there is that honestly, our annotators can be very inventive when they're trying to interact with us. So we are continually trying to evolve our methodologies to match their creativity. We are also continuing to innovate in the space of monitoring and verification so that we can identify anomalies very early on. That's the whole kind of goal there, is to identify anomalies early and to be very consistent and thorough in checking throughout the lifetime of the project.
I think we talk about sometimes borrowing the term from banking of zero trust. So perpetually, and this is a shift from this isn't the true kind of definition in that sense. So I'm not a cybersecurity kind of expert, but it's continually expecting validation. Regularly, they're constantly having to prove that they are who they say they are, where they say they are, producing the data that we know that they are capable of producing. So that, thank you, that makes complete sense. So do you have any details around an example or any statistics on that? Is it across the workforce?
I think that, I think the proof is that in production, we actually remove very few people for identity reasons. It's quite a low number. I think that the processes that Knut talked about upstream for us do an incredible job of screening the vast majority of folks who are looking to misrepresent themselves. So I think that is really a testament to the thought and strategy that Welo Data puts into this very, very important topic. It really is edge cases, and we're not seeing a ton of folks who need to exit our system for identity reasons, which is
single digit percentages, which is lower
Absolutely.
than industry standard for sure. Mm-hmm. for those types of occurrences. And this is for our curated pool of people is 500,000, sometimes more, and we're constantly vetting and qualifying and bringing in more replenishment, and then dropping people if they're not participating or if their quality isn't where we expect them to be. And that's over hundreds of languages and maybe thousands of universities, to the point earlier. Okay, so moving forward in the discussion, we come to the practical measures and technologies that can be employed to do these things that we're talking about and ensuring the integrity of the pipeline. So it's important to understand the challenges, and then it's a whole other piece to actively implement solutions that do all of those things that we know are correct for all of those things that we know are a problem, and safeguard the data that we're providing to our customers. So I'd like to ask you, what are the measures that we can use to verify workforce identity and qualifications, and what are some of those detection methods? So a little more detail on what we just touched on, Canute.
Yeah, and so we've definitely already. It's a good question. We've already talked a little bit about the verification of credentials, actually doing some digital verification there, so you can quickly confirm authenticity of things like academic and professional qualifications, not just trust that the qualification exists, but you can then also have a multifaceted approach that includes things like biometric verification. You can have fingerprint, facial recognition, ensure that the person who is who they claim to be. If you only have a digital profile, well, this is a physical person. Physical characteristics can really be used to actually verify that those two things are working in concert. So in terms of detection methods, we're looking at advanced analytics, machine learning algorithms that can flag unusual patterns or inconsistencies in the candidate's history. You want to find the outliers, the people who are too consistent, who aren't consistent enough. For instance, if a candidate's employment history shows really rapid job changes across countries, that might warrant a closer look. Is that something that immediately disqualifies them? Not necessarily, but it is something that's worth investigating. And you can bring multiple instances of things like that in concert to then do more detailed fraud verification and limit suspicious candidates and transactions.
And to add to that too, I know it's incredibly complex because on top, if we want to do biometric verifications, we have to comply with all the local laws, and at the country level, maybe at the EU-wide level. So then we have all of these different parameters that take into account inputs from where we're even sourcing people and data. So it becomes an incredibly complex web across all of these pieces.
Yeah.
Carrie, do you want to talk a little bit about behavioral compliance metrics?
Absolutely. I think where we're evolving in, we have a long history of traditional data quality measurement tactics, and those all still hold and are extremely valuable. But as an addition to that, we really want to look at this domain of behavior compliance, really meaning that are the annotators and are they interacting correctly with our process? So this is where I think our tech really shines, and our thought leadership on this really shines, because we're looking to use the latest in AI, some of the algorithms that Knut mentioned in pre-production. That same philosophy applying in production, where we're catching annotators who are anomalies. So looking at patterns where they are either going too fast or too slow, are they skipping critical steps, and maybe some anomalies in the distribution of their answers indicating careless answering or things of that nature. I think that's where our tech really shines, and that we're really looking to this kind of additional layer beyond the traditional methodology that we use to paint us a good picture of an annotator's overall quality. And so we are really looking at a holistic approach here. That's the goal here. It's like we can no longer just look at one dimension. We really have to consider all of them. And I'll keep talking about the sandwich, but it really is.
I was going to say too, I wanted to jump in and say, I love when your team comes with these sort of flags that they've built in parameters of saying, oh, we can tell when this rater's getting tired and they're starting to just kind of click through. And it's amazing
Absolutely.
that we're able to figure out and extrapolate from that data. So, okay, what are the fraud types of activities? We talk behavioral pieces, like my favorite example, when they're getting tired, but fraudulent activities, which are unfortunate, but a part of our lives in every aspect of everything that we all do. Knut, are you seeing any particular common activities and any changes recently?
Yeah, so this is a unique but perhaps non-exhaustive list, but makes sense when you're trying to classify where these generally fall into. I think prevalent issues, we've already talked a little bit about identity fraud. Individuals misrepresent who they are to gain access to systems, data, things they shouldn't have. This can be a risk, especially if there's sensitive proprietary data, there's something related to the customer. Now, this is why it's important to continue verifying identity and continue verifying patterns when you have workers, because you can have things like account selling, or someone gains access to an account that they shouldn't have. That can constitute identity fraud. So we want to make sure that we're looking out for that. Then on a little bit more of the front end, you have things like spam accounts and exam cheating. Spam accounts are the fake accounts that are created to infiltrate systems. They try to skew data. Well, they don't try to skew data, but they do skew data in a particular direction. They tend to be following some pretty explicit patterns as well to say, hey, how do you kind of do the bare minimum to pass, the bare minimum to get paid? The goal is to get in and get out with money. I think at this point, these like spam accounts know that they're probably going to get caught at some point. So the goal of them is to extract value as quickly as they can. They can then be very damaging as a result because they're trying to maximize a payout system. And that can really lead to inaccurate, biased outcomes for your AI data. So you want to limit your spam accounts, and then exam cheating as well. If individuals are sharing bypassing systems that are designated to verify qualifications, they're giving answers to others. It means that unqualified individuals can get into the training process. That also can compromise AI integrity. So you want to be looking at that. Because maybe someone isn't a spam account, but they are pretending to be educated about something that they're not when you consider an exam system. So validation against that and quality systems allows you to then validate if that person is actually going to perform at the level you need them to perform at.
And these are kind of broad strokes, because there's ways that you can break these down into individual steps. So having, we design and programs exam sequences, and we funnel people out to get them past, past these gates as well, so that we're not kind of clogging up the pipeline of people coming in as well. Carrie, sorry, you were going to say something?
I kind of just to add to, the list that Knut mentioned, I think there are other types of production signals that we are very vigilant about. And they range from folks just kind of not really paying attention and wanting to do the work. So it is a kind of fraud, because if you're not being very attentive to, the process, that's a version of fraud, all the way up to people who are, just really trying to get access to our systems to get paid for a little while and then move on, because they know that eventually, the processes will find them and remove them from our systems. So I think examples are things like scripting responses, where we see someone who has gone through the trouble of writing an actual script to do the annotations for them. Sometimes they use, and what we're trying to be very vigilant about is where they use AI tools to generate content or translate content. With this access and prevalence of tools, it's fantastic, but there's also a flip side that we have to be very vigilant about, and are continually trying to evolve ways to ensure that any kind of generated content is not represented as novel human content. So that's definitely something that we are continuing to look at more advanced tactics to identify those.
High school teachers are struggling with that too, right?
High school, college, both teachers and I think students, so it's going to be an interesting, I think, next couple of years, and how that really evolves to pinpoint where there is genuine human content. There is, even in production where you have exam opportunities, we do see collusion, and that's everything from a few people gathering together and discussing answers to actually seeking answers online. So, I think there we have a lot of different tactics that we use to try to minimize that type of behavior. And people using multiple accounts, sometimes it's just one person trying to be three people and trying to sort of maximize how much volume they can do on a particular project and therefore get paid, kind of a maximum amount. But other times it's also coupled with careless answers, or using multiple people, like a subcontractor kind of situation. So these are things that we're always trying to look at patterns to determine if we can identify this kind of fraudulent activity. And these are just examples. I think there's, the diversity of fraud changes all the time and can be very complex. And so the key is really to have a robust vigilance to detect these fraudulent activities, to have a plan to act on them, and really determine the root cause so that you can solve for that, so you're not continually trying to solve the same problem over and over, and then being able to rapidly implement a solution. I think that's really where we retreat to in terms of, the backbone of how we are investigating fraud in production.
This is all tying into, then this actually leads perfectly into the next question. So we want to go deeper into the exploration of data integrity with all of these different parameters that you both just mentioned. And there's so many more, to your point, Carrie. These are just some of the things that we track and we check for, and there's endless ways that people are trying to game systems. And we have to do all this while scaling and managing that challenge of scaling quality in programs that have rapid deployments, sometimes a week, where we get go, and then we have to have people creating and annotating and rewriting data, or whichever the problem or the sort of use case is for that customer, within a week. And sometimes it has to be scaled rapidly into thousands and thousands of people across the world. So also in a very short time frame. So when we're managing these large workforces, it becomes incredibly complex. And then we have to balance speed and quality. So Canute, first, maybe you could talk a little bit about how do we ramp up, especially in the growth function, and make sure that we're ramping and iterating with quality and keeping in sync to meet those rapid requirements that customers have now.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a hard problem. I think it goes without saying that you have to be very intentional about your planning. You have to be strategic and actually then leverage technology at scale. Manual processes tend to fail at this scale, so you got to do something that's a little more enabled and automated. So first, having that clear and structured training program is really important. You can have modular training content that can be adapted to different roles and responsibilities within the workforce. That's a really effective way to do this, because you could, say, scan the entire population for that one example of, oh, maybe you need someone who's really educated in this particular domain expertise. Or there's some degree of how can you educate people to perform to that standard. Not to say that you're taking total novices, but that you can actually get people to say, well, here's how this type of data labeling works. And that modularized training content and making it easy to access, that's really important to quickly scale. Then second, you actually utilize the technology to streamline and automate the onboarding process and make it pretty continuous. So you can utilize AI-driven platforms to personalize learning paths. You understand, oh, here's where one candidate might be performing less well than another, and really give that individual targeted feedback. That not only accelerates the process, but also ensures that each member of the workforce reaches required competency level a lot more efficiently. Now, at the end of the day, these are people. You need to be able to treat them like people and understand that their learning paths are going to be different. The more that you can support that, the more you can actually have an effective workforce that's going to deliver you the quality that you need in the time that you need it to be delivered.
I love that, because that's personalized sort of training, the modularized training, sometimes even micro trainings. And this is what modern pedagogy is teaching us, and we're seeing in schools that they're implementing, right? So we're taking all of those learnings and not just continually training people in the same way that has always been done in this industry. That's great.
Yeah.
Carrie, anything? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted I was going to ask you about how that plays into the quality elements, but you're probably about to say that. Sorry.
I think that from a production perspective, I love that everything that Knut mentioned, which is upstream activity. So these are things that can be done in preparation of a rapid deployment. So you have a ready and screened workforce pool to draw from, so that when you need to start a project immediately, and we've had those where you're tasked with putting together a annotator pool in a matter of days. It's really helpful to have all of that done and ready to go, so that from a production standpoint, we can then implement project-specific qualification to add like another just-in-time layer of verification before they enter into production. And that type of screening is really there to ensure that you are picking the best of the best. You're able to screen for aptitude for your actual project, and that they are demonstrating that they can assimilate the guidelines that you've published and can apply them with fairly good quality from the get-go, because in a situation where you're in rapid deployment, there is not a lot of time for a long learning path, or a, even sometimes an extended learning path. Sometimes we're needing to accomplish all of this in a matter of, a few days. So you're really trying to accelerate the learning by verifying aptitude through demonstrated competency. So that just adds another layer in rapid deployment. So that's just a little tactic that differs when you have a little bit of a longer timeline. But we understand that we need to have processes in place for both. So this is how we align to requests for something that we need to do very quickly. And then once they move on into actual production, just having very robust real-time performance tracking, where you're looking at data often in intervals to ensure that the quality is meeting your expectations. And quality is such a kind of a big word that means a lot of things underneath it. But, we're looking at all of those factors to ensure that this is the right group of people, we are implementing the guidelines in the right way, and the quality is resulting in the outcomes that we expect. So it's always a rush and a kind of a lot of things going on when you're rapidly deploying, but we found that these tactics work really well, and they all draw from best practice that we use day to day on all projects. So we're just able to adjust those tactics to be much more condensed. Like I said, we're really trying to fire and not do things in parallel. We're trying to do a lot of things at the same time. We are trying to do a lot of things in parallel, like all at the same time, to make sure that we're not holding anything up at any one given point.
Right. No single point of failure. It's funny, you guys actually just answered some of the questions that we're seeing in the chat about how we recruit and train without even me bringing it up. So this thank you. And then the next topic that I wanted to bring to is kind of building on that. So if we've been discussing the pre-production screening process and in production screening, how maybe could we dive a little bit more in your experience on how the approaches differ between the two? So Carrie, I think you kind of touched on this. So maybe Knut, you could add your perspective on this.
Yeah, and I know that I've sort of talked to this already. So I think the important distinction now, maybe that I'll talk about, is a bit of the philosophy for the people watching this, because you have pre-production screening and you have in-production screening, and we've talked about both. Pre-production, that's that first line of defense. That's where you're rigorously vetting identity. You're getting the qualifications, backgrounds of contributors. You're employing your verification methods and doing your checks, your verification, your behavioral analysis. All of that's to say, are we bringing on individuals who really meet our standards for integrity and expertise? You front load a lot of this because that is the most difficult check. As you use that pre-production screening, you can also do this thing where you gate particular work around skills, which is what Carrie was just talking about. You don't necessarily have to vet everyone for every skill at the beginning, but you have a very good opportunity to establish an understanding of, oh, someone might be particularly good at this. Hey, let's do a little bit of psychometric analysis, have other qualitative assessments that we develop internally in partnership with experts in the field to really guarantee that not only are these just not people who are fraudsters, but these are people who are skilled in particular ways, and they're going to be able to be leveraged to do particular tasks. Like, that understanding up front is really valuable. Then in production, that's where you get to that vigilance, ongoing monitoring. That's where you can deploy technologies and processes to detect and prevent fraudulent activities like account sharing, subcontracting. You're continuously checking this. You can use AI processes or other automatable things to flag unusual patterns. Again, those things that indicate fraud. The goal there is really maintaining integrity of that workforce that you've already established, the quality of the data that they already can produce, even as they become part of operations. Anything can kind of become subject to fraud, but you front load, and then it's that monitoring when you've done really good upfront verification and a little bit of skills validation as well.
I think you just touched on something I wanted to bring up that you and I regularly talk about, which is the sort of holistic personal view of people, the psychometrics, because sometimes we have AI training projects where people are needing to do things, validate something. It's more skills based than credentials based, and understanding, or even kind of what their hobbies or interests are, which isn't something that you can easily vet. So this ties also to a question we received from the group of what type of people we're recruiting. And we touched on this on the last webinar a bit, but to your point, or kind of build on what you just explained, we look at the holistic person. We look at people who have all varying levels of degrees, entry level, high school. Everybody, we don't do things often with minors, but there are occasions where minors with full participation and compliant areas are contributing to training AI that is useful for them in an educational environment, as an example. But mostly it's, high school educated up to PhDs and all of those types of things. And is there anything sort of on the psychometrics that you find interesting? I could talk about this sort of all day, but Knut, this is your specialty. So
it's, oh boy. I think one of the really interesting elements there that we maybe don't find so much in when you're talking about foundational model development, but a little bit of post-training, is the evaluation of particulars. Like if you consider psychometrics and the ways that we see maybe AI's use cases get challenged today or fail today, it is in those extrema. It's in the less understood element. It's in someone's particular knowledge. And I think, as you mentioned, knowing that knowledge does not necessarily pair with explicit qualifications. Someone might be very good at outdoor activity or poetry or something like this, and not have an external qualification to validate it, but that skill's been identified through that analysis. That's important and that's valuable. And that can also then introduce really valuable variety within your data. If you're able to consider that sort of thing, then you can actually get a richer data set from the get-go, rather than just thinking of it as kind of this gated, modularized, view of the world of like who these people are and what information they can produce. I can rant about that stuff, but I won't go on too long.
Let's do another webinar, because this is something about that topic, because it's something you and we're all quite passionate about. It's something that I think we approach very uniquely in the industry as well. Yeah. So, Carrie, anything on the teaching methods that you wanted to talk about? And the other piece is the data governance. Both of those, I think, are really, something you're quite passionate about. And ensuring data integrity through both of those aspects. I know you both touched on teaching as well, but mitigating bias. And if you have any recommendations for strategies, Carrie, that businesses can employ in their own efforts, or when they're partnering with a company like Welo Data.
I think that overall, they absolutely should have a data governance policy and framework if they don't already, because this just gives them, the reference and continuity to detail how they're going to interact with their data. And this really starts with strategies like establishing clear data ownership and accountability, implementing robust processes around data quality management, and maintaining documentation, which is not a big favorite amongst, I think everyone is like, when we're talking about documentation, but it really is key and important, especially in terms of business continuity and understanding scope, and making sure that, there's thought and practice in place for the different types of scenarios that will come up. And when you're talking about ethical AI, which, Sarah, to your point, like we could have a whole nother huge talk about ethical AI, but really it is that understanding that, and defining what bias looks like, and making sure that there are policies in place to audit for it, because it's very important to understand impact as we're emerging on a lot of, projects that are new, and, we're not sure quite what the results are going to be. So really looking at impact there is important. And then regular monitoring and review, and, having that rigor to make sure that you're going to go back and keep everything fresh and updated, and you have a regular schedule so that nothing seems to kind of fall by the wayside as you're going through kind of regular production motions. It's really important to have that interval where you're going back and checking and making sure that everything is performing as expected.
It's important. We've seen and our customers making those adjustments. I mentioned to you that I had spoken to a colleague a couple days ago, and the impact of changing a couple of weights on some models that their team was building was significant. And then you can't just make those weight changes without seeing how that affects your data training strategy and your data pipeline. So making then the subsequent changes there, potentially changing quality measures. What are the right types of quality measures? They may work in one situation well, maybe they don't work in once you've changed a weight or in a different use case, even within the same kind of platform or model that you're trying to build.
Absolutely.
We talk a lot about Krippendorf's alpha versus Cohen's kappa, right?
I think the thing to take away from using metrics is they are measurements and they're tools, but you also want to make sure that you have the companion processes to understand root cause and be able to fix it. Metrics are nice. They're often, a good way to show that you are where your baseline is and how you're improving or not improving. So it's a good way to see the general trend of where you're going, but you really have to make sure that you match those with an action. If not, it's just numbers. So that's where all of the the data quality architecture comes in, is really thoughtful processes about not just how we're doing, but how can we fix it if it's not going well.
Exactly. I think that kind of sums up. Those are best practices. If there's anything to add to that, Knut, please jump in. Otherwise, I'll jump to audience questions.
Okay, for a second I thought I had muted myself. No, I think that's a pretty great I feel like that's a good summary. Like I could add go, but then I just get nerdy about something, so we can move on to questions.
I think what we want to say to sum it up is that data quality is driven by data integrity, and there's so many pieces that feed data integrity that drive you to the data quality that you're looking for, right? And you can't have one without the other. So I think that's perfect. A quick question we got from the crowd. What happens if someone claims to be familiar with a culture and then it turns out they aren't? We've seen this. I always use the example, especially, in election years, we see a lot of challenges in election years. So if you imagine somebody is validating content or AI algorithms that are promoting or depromoting content, then they're answering questions about an election that's happening. For example, we all know we have their presidential election, but they don't live in the US. They don't know what's happening on a day-to-day basis. They're not seeing that. That can significantly skew the results of the model or what the model is producing, and then promote or depromote content that isn't necessarily relevant. So Knut and Carrie, do you have anything on that and how significant the implications are for the quality of data from cultural nuance perspective?
Yeah, I think Carrie can probably speak to the quality a little bit more, but at least from cultural nuance in terms of how we get those people and think about how it gets ingested, it is a critical factor, and it's an element that sometimes can be forgotten, but it's important to remember that it's critical when you're dealing with diverse data sets, when you're dealing with global contributors or global information. Like, it can be easy to misrepresent cultural familiarity, but you can do deeper dives to actually understand what cultural familiarity looks like, because those misinterpretations, those can lead to biases, bad performance of your AI models. To mitigate this, we try to include we do include cultural competency assessments in our screening process. And that happens from the very beginning, so that you're actually getting people who are also screened for their competency and understanding of something that's a little more localized. And then we also provide ongoing cultural training support to make sure that our contributors are well equipped to handle data that has cultural sensitivity and also deliver that accurately. Just because someone speaks English in your in your election example, I don't expect someone in the UK to necessarily know a lot about US elections, but they still are going to be able to speak English well. Just a language restriction isn't necessarily going to be enough. Or if someone is in Spain and speaking Spanish from Spain, their Spanish and their cultural understanding is actually going to be very different from, say, someone in Ecuador. And we can then identify that those are separate elements. Like there are critical cultural distinctions between those groups. And the more you can screen for that and consider that as part of your data, then you can actually have really high fidelity, especially where it's important to have it be localized. And then Carrie, if you want to talk about quality elements to that.
Absolutely. I think the key that you said there is, understanding when a task in a project has a need for high cultural nuance, because sometimes they don't. And so, you can balance that with the type of annotator that is chosen for the task. Sometimes it's purely language driven. And then other times where you have an agreement that there is cultural nuance, but it can be, it's sort of less critical. There are things where we can tell someone who speaks, for example, like to your point, having someone who speaks Spanish in Ecuador, we can tell them, for example, this data comes from Spain. So that you set this, the example. And so even where there's a bit of cultural nuance, sometimes that can be overcome by just declaring where the source of your data is from to help compensate for some of that where it's not highly critical. But absolutely, where we have high cultural requirements for a task, if someone is not in the locale or has spent a great deal of time in that locale, it could be very detrimental and skewing, just like Sarah had mentioned about election results and that type of nuance, for sure.
We kind of touched on this, but we did have another question on this last answer. But we did have another question that ties cultural nuance, and it's about how organizations can ensure AI models remain trustworthy and unbiased, particularly in the context of data integrity. So I think we talked about cultural nuance, and this is another. We've got a whole bunch of next webinar topics from here. But anything to add on the bias piece in terms of? So it's complicated, right? Managing demographic profiles. It's kind of like weights. You could almost approach it like weights in your contributor pool around having a wide swath of people who represent various groups.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's where all of that pre-planning for the project comes in and determining what that distribution looks like. I've worked on projects where it was important. It was a US project, but it wasn't enough to say we were going to just collect US, annotators at large. We wanted to be very regionally specific and balanced. So we broke the United States up by region, and we actually had targets per region to get that diversity. So I think that really comes at the very onset to really understand the diversity that is needed. We'll do the commensurate checks to ensure they're where they say they are, but at the foundation of it, you really have to determine what that distribution looks like to reduce the bias that that we're thinking may occur without that thoughtfulness.
And if I can add to that, especially if you look at some of the organizations that are really digging into both AI governance and ethics, I'll reframe the question a little bit, is that there is always bias. You're not going to generate an unbiased system. So what's really important is, I think you recognize that at first, is say, I'm not going to have a totally unbiased system, but what biases can be filtered in? As Carrie was saying, having different demographic groups, how do we begin to account for those? You can mitigate bias, you can smooth out bias as well. And I see that the question also is thinking about the legal sector too. This is a recurring theme. That bias can be important, right? That can be really valuable, especially if you're thinking about something like the legal sector. Bias may be very valuable when you're thinking about things like case precedent. That's actually important bias to have and identify, but you can then say that is an element that we should be including, that is an element of this data, and then it's part of your data collection. And I think then for us, as we think about sourcing, how we partner with different groups, we're able to have those conversations as you build out your models and help guide as well. So it's not just we hope you thought about this, but it's an active conversation. We can be partners to get there.
I think it's again about looking at across to build on what you both said. It's looking across all these different parameters of the people. I like the legal example, and thank you for pointing that out on the question, because maybe even an super simplified version of that is, if you are for an AI legal system or legal tool, if you only have defending like public defenders or only criminal defense attorneys answering and training it, you won't have any perspective from the prosecution side. So how useful is the tool? So you need that's just one job function or an element that you do want to make sure that you take into account, which you wouldn't if you're just looking at traditional demographics of they're a lawyer and they've gone to, at this school, or they have this number of years of experience, but kind of where are they in their subspecialty, or what is their history and their background, and how do they think? Have they been trained to think?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have one last question. It's a little bit broad, so and how we'll answer it, but I think we could add something here because we're all part of the AI economy. So will AI lead to massive loss of jobs? And research is showing that that is possible. But what is the way forward to ensure that there is a balance to prevent a spike in unemployment?
Easy question to round it out. So let's see. I think when you look at this, there's so actually before the AI industry, I worked in the solar industry. I worked for a solar software company. And the whole goal of that solar software company was to introduce automation. The solar industry used a tool that was meant for kind of general purpose design at a large scale for engineering projects. It didn't necessarily automatically tie into any of the things that you need to design solar. Now, when we then presented this, here's an automatable solution, what shifted was how it worked. And having been someone who was doing the engineering work, my days then could change from, oh, I've got to spend this much time in this program to get this output, to, well, this element can be automated, and now I can actually spend a little bit more time on the creative side. And especially when you consider LLMs today and the way that they function, like objectively, LLMs are going to lack a bit of that creative output. They're going to be great at starting things, but there's still a very human element to finishing things. Now, for the broader economy and like how that works in terms of like business planning, I don't know that I can comment on that too much, but for us and how we think about how we then integrate AI to still like enable a workforce, it is about when you're ethically applying that, it's about how do you push for automation that takes something that's maybe a little bit inhuman. Oh, I just have to click this many times in a program to finish this thing, versus I can speed it up. I know that's a very simplified example, but like those are the things that aren't necessarily the fun human elements to do. And then we can push to take those, automate them, put them into a system like that, and get to do things that are a bit more creative and rewarding, ideally, as our jobs. So I think the more that we can push for that culturally, the more this continues to be understood as an automation tool and something that enables work rather than one that is purely destructive. I know there are cultural elements about that we could totally go into, but then that'd become the Canute Politics podcast, and we're not going to go there.
I think yes, it becomes a way that can differentiate you in how you can use tools to make you more efficient. So being a part, we're all part of the AI training. So I would say encouraging people to be a part of AI in any way that it can help. And sometimes the way to get familiar with that and how you can bring it into your work is to start in your personal life. My favorite little example, and it kind of ties to what you were saying, Canute, about being creative. I love to cook. That's my sort of, I'm not necessarily, it's not about the creative outlet, but it's like sort of a meditation for me. So I like to follow a recipe as a way to, it's kind of like a moving meditation. But I don't want to go through my cookbooks and pick out the recipe and make the grocery list. So I go into an LLM and I'll say, out of these two cookbooks, make a meal plan for me this week with these types of dinners and write the grocery list out. And then it takes me a whole 4 minutes to type that in. They tell me the page numbers and the groceries that I need to get. I go get the groceries, or if I really want to, I order them. So there's a lot of ways but I still get to cook. The creative part that I enjoy is there. So then that's like getting familiar with using it is a good way in your personal life. It's a good way to start bringing it into your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I've used the cooking trick as well. I just actually tell it, I have these two things, please make me something with pantry staples, and it does a pretty good job of suggesting something.
That's great. And then we get to enjoy other things. So
exactly.
We have a couple more questions, but I know we're kind of running up at the end of the time. So we have a question about pilots and deploying and short-term challenges. So it's in your experience, Carrie, what are your some successful tactics you've deployed for short-term delivery requests to ensure data integrity. Pilots are specifically presenting challenges when the window to launch quality measures is small, and the project guidelines and resources are not robust. So maybe you could touch on that briefly, and then we'll send a follow-up with a little bit more detail, because that's a big question.
It's a big question. Yeah, I think here is really having, I keep going back to this, but really establish best practice, and that's going to serve you well in rapid deployments. We have tactics that we use that are largely the same every time, but honestly, the biggest determination of success, or something that will help success there, is early agreement on what that quality is going to look like and what is realistic for the time frame. I think sometimes, when you're in a rush to say yes, and you're excited about the project and we want to hit 95%, and there's just some things that you're not going to be able to accomplish. People at the end of the day are people, and they have learning pathways, and that isn't, if you're working on a very complex use case, some of that cannot be circumvented in 3 days. So I think it's really best practice. It's thoughtful design of the project, breaking it down into smaller pieces if necessary to make it a lot more component driven, and then having good understanding of what the outcome is going to be. And then honestly, in the middle of it, the pulse check. And if it's not looking and going the way it should, agreement that there can be a pause point, like an exit point, where we need to stop and redesign if things, it doesn't happen hardly at all, but it's good to have that in your back pocket to say, if we hit this is where we're going to pause and come back and talk all together. It's a partnership.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think in the end, everybody wins from that. It's less expensive and more efficient for everyone involved if you have better data, and then you can usually have less of the total volume because it's better and you can use more of it. So the focus should be on taking a breath to pivot if needed, to make sure that most of your data is what it needs to be, rather than having to pivot later on when there's so much that's kind of polluting your pipeline.
Exactly. 100%.
All right. Well, we will take the other questions that have come in and get back to you all individually. It has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you both for talking with me today and for representing Welo Data. We also appreciate so much all of our attendees and for your participation and questions. So we will welcome your feedback in any form and any ideas for other topics, although I think we've generated a few here. So I hope everybody has a great day. Take care.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.